yes, we don't have a long-term plan or strategic planning. That's one thing. But do you think many of us do not even know our history? We have never sat down to say, hey, this thing, let's look at the history of this particular stuff. Where did it start? And where do we want it? Where do we want it to go? See, 16th, 17th, 18th century, Europe did that, for example. That's when the Enlightenment philosophers came on board. And they hashed out so many different issues in their societies. Okay? Britain, France, Germany, they did a lot of work, a lot of intellectual work. And that is the foundation of these institutions in Europe. And that's what the founders of America took on board to create that country. And that's the same thing that Japan took to build that country. And that's the same thing that South Korea took to build that country. And even Singapore took some of that to build their country. Now, why we that were colonized by these same Europeans, but somehow we refuse to take all those things, sit down, hash them out, and adapt them to our society. Why? Because we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just take them and then look at our society. Where does this fit? What do we need to change? But we haven't even done that. It's as if we want to build us from scratch, or we don't want to build it at all. What do you think?
My first reaction to that question would be, where do we start from in terms of history?
Okay.
Do we start from before 1960, for example, Nigeria? Let's say Nigeria, for example. We got independent in 1960. Do we take 1960 as a reference point?
Okay.
Or do we take prior to 1960 as a reference point?
Okay.
For talking about our history? The second thing for me is that, unfortunately, I think talking about history of Africa now is perhaps too late. I think the horse has already bolted. If you go online, personally, the level of misinformation that is available now to be difficult to have to have an intellectual conversation about the history of Africa.
No, but we can. See, for example, our professors in our various schools, in our various universities. See, once upon a time, most African countries had at least one or two universities that were highly rated in the world. Once upon a time. Okay? And see, my father-in-law is a retired professor now, but the gentleman had, he at least his name is amongst those botanists that did work, a world-renowned work. Okay? And we have so many other people across various areas of academics, Africans, okay, that did work. So our historians, history teachers, at least they can do some work.
Again, I would, as much as I appreciate the passion that you have exhibited here, personally, I think that horse has bolted. And I think that nowadays, you have to question what is intellectualism anyway.
Okay.
When it comes to certain conversation, because people are now gravitating towards the source rather than the content. The source of your information.
I get you. Yeah, that happens a lot.
Yeah. So even if the most renowned professor of African history puts out a paper out there, you probably will be drowned out in the other conversation going on, not just about the content, but the interpretation of that content. And if you look today online, if you try and Google some of the subjects, you really find professors and others part of that conversation. You usually will find a lot of people.
Yes.
With different
people like me.
Yeah, different data source out there. So much as I agree with you that coming to terms with our history is a very important part of understanding our identity and building this future. But I think that conversation, and also with the powerful influence of disinformation, I think we've gone beyond that. I wish I was wrong, but my personal view is that we've gone beyond that. And we can talk about our history, but we need to be quite mindful that there's a lot of information out there that people have come to make up their mind about a lot of things.
Yeah.
So trying to then steer the conversation towards, let's talk about the history. Yes, but this means X, Y, Z. I mean, I've watched videos where people are discussing the history of Africa that I do not recognize. I recognize the history, but the interpretation, I do not recognize it.
Me too.
And I did history, right, up to my WAEC, right?
Okay.
In those days.
Yeah.
So I did history. I know, we studied ancient history, but we studied it in a more academic form, not so much as interpreting what does that mean in today's world. So I get that difference. But the interpretation has become more militant.
Yeah.
And sometimes there are things dropped there that are not supported by any evidence.
Any evidence.
Any evidence. But people buy into it because it fits into a narrative.
Yeah.
And therefore, it's very difficult then to go back and let's talk about the underlying substance, not the interpretation, right? But people have gone beyond that. So to come back to your point, yes, we should, but I'm not sure it's going to help us where we are now.
Well, we need to do something. We need to do something because we can't continue this way.
Yes.
See, to build those very needed institutions, we need to do some serious work.
Yes.